Hello there, this is Will, and I'm going to try to cover in this video what the basics of a syllogism are and what the standard form will entail. Okay, so over here we have the parts of the standard syllogism, and over here we have the mood. And after I cover these two things, I'm going to determine what this thing called figure is, because you're going to have to know what that is for the upcoming exam. So when we look at the parts of a syllogism, we have a major term, we have a minor term, and we have a middle term, right? Now, the major term is the predicate of the conclusion, right? The subject of the conclusion is the minor term. And the minor term and the major term go in the minor and the major premise in the syllogism. The middle term appears in both premises but not in the conclusion, right? So it's just something to keep in mind, and I'm going to give a little example really quick here. So all artists are egoists. Some artists are paupers. And then, therefore, so I'm going to draw a line here. Some paupers are egoists. All right. So now that I've got that written out here, I'm going to determine the mood real quick, okay? So I'm going to look over here at my syllogism in this first premise here. Well, this is an A proposition, right? So we'll just say this is an A. And then this seems to be a what? Well, this is an I proposition, so I'm going to write I over here to the side. And the conclusion is also an I. So this looks like an AII, right? So we would say the mood of this syllogism is AII. Now we're going to look at some other things. I'm going to change color a little bit here just so I can circle some things or whatever. So when we look at the conclusion, right, this is where we're looking for all of our information to to make sure that this syllogism is in standard order. So when we look here at our basic definitions over here, right, we look at these to determine order. Well, the conclusion is pretty important because it has the major and the minor term in it, and the middle term doesn't appear in the conclusion. So we look over here and it says the predicate of the conclusion, which is this term, right? The predicate of the conclusion. So this, we're just going to label this P. That's the major term, right? So major term. Now here is going to be the what? It's going to be the subject term, right? And this, as it so happens, it's going to be the minor term. And this is the case by definition over here, okay? So we don't have to look very far to figure out what's going on. So then that means that when we look up here, we know the middle term is going to be artist. Well, why? Well, oops. Well, why is this going to be over here? Well, as it so happens, the word artist appears in both the premises but not in the conclusion. So we know that by once we, the fact that we have the major term here and the minor term here, then we can start looking at what's called the major and minor premises. Now the first premise in a syllogism is called what? Well, it's called the major premise. Isn't that very convenient? Very, very convenient indeed. So that's the major premise, and that's where the major term goes, and that's where you do see it right here. And then the second one is called the minor premise, right? It's so convenient for our purposes, right? So you know that the syllogism is in the right order because the major premise is first, right? The major premise is first. Then the minor premise is second. And then the conclusion is below this line. So you can also look at it, you can basically determine the standard form by looking at the conclusion solely. The way I kind of look at it is like this. When I'm going to just draw an arrow. I'm an arrow guy. I draw an S, then I draw a P for the conclusion, right? And then what I do is I just tilt this guy upward, and then I draw it, and then I just draw a line right there over the foot of that arrow, and then I draw another arrow going up. And then I just rotate the S over here. I rotate the P over here, and I know that this is the major premise and the minor premise, right? And I know that because I've rotated over the minor term and the major term. And this leaves me a nice little box to draw my conclusion, actually. So that's how I kind of think about it, is like this will be the first premise or the major, and this would be the second or the minor. So this is just how I think about ordering, but maybe it's because that's how my brain works. And this is how I determine the standard order. Now when it comes to figure, there are only 4 figures, right? And so the figure is determined by the placement of the middle term. So Copy gives, Copy gives the following diagram. So it's like M dash P, S dash M, therefore S dash P. Then the next one is M dash, let me undo here, edit, undo, undo. Okay, all right. So Copy gives then P dash M, and then S dash M, and then therefore S dash P. And then over here, M dash P, M dash S, therefore S dash P, and then what's this last one here? It's P dash M and M dash S, right? All right, so the way I think Professor Hirsch may have talked about this in class is that there's a way to look at this diagram, right? So this is basically called the first figure, the second figure, the third figure, and the fourth figure. So when we look at our example over here, right, our artist is the middle term, and it appears over there. Well, what figure corresponds to this syllogism if both the middle terms appear in this order? Well, it looks like that it's a 3. That is a 3. Right? Look over here, look over there, and I'm just going to undo that real quick. So it looks like we have an AII3 syllogism. So how do we remember this? Well, Professor Hirsch gave an interesting way of doing it. He called it the tie, right? The tie. So you just draw these like lines through the middle terms of each one, and that is how you get. And this is like a necktie. I don't know. We'll just go with it. But this allows you to remember the first, second, third, and fourth parts of the figure. Here you have the mood, so you can now figure out the mood and the figure of the syllogism. And here you can figure out the standard order with all this information here, and it will come in very helpful when thinking about syllogisms.